He was just a wee tote, maybe 2 years old, standing out on the green there in front of the houses, bawling his eyes out and shouting for his mum. I remember he had a wee red tricycle. I scanned all around the street from the window waiting for his mother to come, but no one came. I didn't recognise the boy. He was maybe visiting someone, but the wee soul was crying something terrible, so I fetched 2 jelly babies from the drawer in the kitchen where I kept the kids' sweeties. When I reached him, I could see he'd been eating a cone. There were dribbles all down his chin. "Beastie, beastie," he kept saying, and that was when I spied a big bumblebee stuck to the wool of his jumper, feasting on a wee dollop of ice cream. I pulled his jersey away from his body so the bee wouldn't sting him, and I tried to flick the creature to the ground, but it was stuck. A man walked past us then, and he looked hard at me. But I kept swiping at the bee to get it off the wee boy's jumper, and he kept crying about the beastie. And then the next thing, I hear his mother come running up the street shouting at me, "Get your hands off my son!" She came in so fast she just whipped him into her arms. "How dare you hit my boy?" And I was trying to explain to her that I wasn't hitting him, I was helping him, but she wouldn't listen. And then I realised the man who'd walked past, it must have looked like that from the street, me swiping at his jumper and the wee thing distraught. But it wasn't true. It's not what happened. After that, word went around that I wasn't kind, that I didn't like children. Me, raising 3 lassies on my own after we lost their father. It's stuck this whole time, and no one else knows the truth of it. The truth of it. What really happened. The truth of it, what's really happening now, here, where I am. Isa's lived here for nearly 6 decades since her husband went to work one day and never came back. She hasn't moved beyond her doorstep since before Christmas. Her legs are in bad shape, so she surfs the furniture between her living room and kitchen mostly and watches telly with the sound turned down for fear of disturbing the neighbours through the wall. Before Easter, she phoned to say she had a box of Quality Street for the kids. She stood at her front door and we talked briefly across the length of her path. And then she laid down the purple box, closed the door behind her, and we retrieved the sweeties from the top step. On Easter Sunday, I got up at the crack to lay out a chocolate treasure hunt in the back garden. Concealment is an art, but I just forgot where I'd put some of them. Only just yesterday, a shiny green triangle of stale fudge fell out of the bush at the back door. Isa's been living locked down for a long time. Lots of folk have, and the rest of us just didn't notice or chose to avert our eyes. Across the wee green, where Isa absolutely did not assault the wee boy with the red tricycle more than half a century ago, Archie lives on his own too. He was born here in the village in 1929, just before the Great Crash. When I was a boy, he says, you could walk up one side of Main Street and down the other in and out of easily 24 shops. Butchers, bakers, grocers, tobacconists, even a sweetie store. It would be a blessing to have 24 shops in the village right now, but there's just the one. And all respect to them, they've done a huge civic service keeping open this whole time. I ducked in there last Tuesday for ketchup. I'm not sure that counts as essential, but the kids were begging for it, for the hot dogs I'd promised them for their tea. I think I knew instinctively walking up the street that it was a mistake to go in. There's something in the way a lot of folk are moving just now, an element of fuck it, I'm coming through anyway, that translates as it happens into 6 folk piling into the cramp shop in quick succession. If I could have got out of there faster, without a bodily collision in a narrow aisle next to the multi-packs of Whispers and Flakes, I would have. But it was too late. So I sucked up that shared air and I added chocolate bars to the ketchup to make the existential risk feel somehow more worth it. I see much more of Archie now that we're not supposed to see anyone at all. I used to scoot past his gate on an afternoon chirping, "How's it going?" And he'd retort, "You're never done running, lass." Turns out, Almost none of that stuff that had me rushing past them so often matters much at all when it comes down to it. And it does, now, come down to it. On his daily outing, Archie has taken to detouring round the full extent of the wee green, past the no ball games sign and the bridal shower of cherry blossom on the grass. He walks with a stick, but steadily enough, and he wears huge PPE-style tinted eyeglasses. I'm out front, hauling out nettle roots and briars as thick as broom handles when he stops at the front gate. Time was I'd be in the garden myself, but I'm fit for the knackers now, I am. Archie says this almost every time I see him. He also says, "You're looking as lovely as ever, lass," and he laughs. And I'd be flattered, but the truth is Archie can scarcely see at all. It's years since his eyes have even been fit to drive, but a turquoise Corsa still sits outside his house. The wee green is out the front of ours, and the wee park is out the back. To get there, we'd normally, politely, head out the front door, then left down the lane. But that lane, and the path it meets between the estate and the rest of the village, is barely a metre wide, high-sided with a fence and a hedge. It's the closest our village has to a contagion corridor, and it makes me twitch. Nowadays, we hop over a low bit of broken fencing at the bottom of the back garden, in behind Roddy and Jackie's pigeon loft. Then we loup their fence into the park itself. Jackie's fine with it, I checked. "I mean, use the gate too if you want," she said. But gates are a treacherous business these days. Last year, a group of local gardening volunteers planted a community orchard in the wee park, with saplings of apple, plum, pear, cherry. Next year, they'll bear fruit, whatever next year looks like. One Saturday morning, a few weeks ago, Jenny put a call out on the local Facebook group to see if anyone might volunteer to cut the grass. The council wasn't able. Within 15 minutes, you could hear the petrol motors striking up. And there's Roddy and a wee crew of bodies, each negotiating a green patch with a mower or a strimmer. It made me feel quite weepy. I mean, it's such a simple, practical act, but it's also a collective form of resistance. Evidence of community, a tangible expression of love. And this wee park, this place where I emphatically am, is loved. At the far side, on the fence behind Inga's house, someone has hung a massive rainbow. And a local artist, Anne, has installed 6 hardy paintings and a massive photographic canvas on the adjoining brick wall. Beauty is its own kind of resistance too. On a Thursday, the Path Edible Fruit and Veg delivery service rolls into the wee park. It started as a first-come, first-served barrow of essentials, tatties, apples, carrots, leeks, a response to the loss of the village bus service and the horrendous supermarket queues even if you could get up the town for a big shop. Now, up to 80 people submit a regular online order in a village of barely more than 300 households. Sweet potatoes and asparagus arrive in our wee park once a week. I'm not even sure you can buy asparagus in the big Morrisons in Dalkeith. A family from one of the nearby farms bring their duck eggs to sell, and Sarah from down the hill fetches sourdough loaves and croissants. I mean, duck eggs and sourdough. It's like a Waitrose advert. Already, dozens and dozens of us are muttering about how brilliant it would be to have a weekly market right here in the wee park when we get to whatever happens next. This is also true. When the local pub, the Foresters, reopened its kitchen last week and announced free takeaway hot lunches on a Wednesday for anyone struggling or doing essential key work, they gave out almost 100 meals in 2 hours. That's 10% of our village. As Jackie, who's coordinated the local food bank run for years, put it, who knew there was that much need, right here? It's a tricky business, the truth of it. What we see and what we don't, and all the hopes, desires, assumptions and prejudices that filter our eyes. The first publicly named COVID death in our area was a man the same age as me called Mofizul Islam. He worked at Domino's Pizza in Dalkeith, right next to Morrison's. Mofizul moved to Scotland recently from Bangladesh, and each of his working days involved a 3-hour round trip by Lothian buses from Edinburgh to Dalkeith. His surviving family reckon he picked up the virus on the journey, and now he's gone. And they're left not only without him, but without official papers, without money, with nowhere to go. Non-residents come and go from one of the nearby houses. I won't say which one. Almost certainly they come for a wee bit of something that might take the edge off things. To take the edge off things, I make the odd self-justificatory trip to the store in Pencaitland, which is posher than the one here in Pathhead and stocks fancier wine. I'm minded of this, and of Isa and the boy and the bee, when I spy a crew of the young ones on an evening, skulking about the wheat field in behind the school, sharing a smoke. The truth of it is this. There was a reckless public exchange of bodily fluids and a prohibited sharing of air amongst a group of arrogant, selfish young men who willfully disregarded medical advice and the communal good and endangered the elders of this village. The truth of it is this. A handful of lads who've been strung out by the lives they were landed with since they were wee boys got momentarily to fuck out of their toxic, impoverished, quite possibly violent households, and for half an hour, in a secluded spot, they held each other afloat on a cloud of smoke. When the Thursday night clap comes, I stand out back looking over the wee park. Beyond the houses at the far side, I know from previous Facebook footage that Tom number 1 has set up his drum kit on the traffic island in the middle of the A68, whilst Tom number 2 hugs his stand-up bass at the requisite social distance. Jenny holds her fiddle at the ready, while Martin, togged up in his best suit, strikes up a fat leading chord on his accordion. And while the young ones light up behind the school, and Isa watches telly with the sound off, and Archie stands outside for a moment beside the car he'll never drive again, soaking up the blessed, fleeting sound of other people, there is music and there is dancing, here, in this place where I am.
The thing that made me think again about Edinburgh was when one day I was out walking with my baby daughter and saw a pensioner's face get beaten by a stranger into a bloody pulp. This was in Tollcross, not far from me, a nice bit near town. Cafes, cute little bars, vintage shops, a beautiful old Art Deco cinema. A man walked into the road without looking as a car was turning the corner. The man stopped and the car drove slowly past him, but a little too close for the man's liking. The car continued on, slowly enough for the man to run after it, wrench open the passenger door, jump in, and punch the driver about a dozen times in the face. I was stood 10 feet away while this happened. It only took a few seconds. Then the man jumped out again and stepped neatly past me in my buggy with my sleeping baby in it, not looking at us, a smirk on his face, and strode away. I called the police. The driver got shakily out of his car and stood with me while we waited for them. He was in his 60s at least, walked with a cane, well-spoken, English. As the attacker had walked past me, I'd had this absurd half-instinct to shout at him, "How dare you let my little girl see this?" As if that was the worst crime that had been committed, to expose her to a version of this city, a city that she was born in and that I fervently hope she will unambiguously call home, to show her an idea of her hometown that I have not approved. Besides, she was asleep. Maybe the thought was as much, how dare you let me see this? This is not the Edinburgh whose existence I allow. This is not the city I choose to be in. The old guy refused to go to hospital, despite the police wanting him to. He tried to make light of the whole thing, making shaky jokes, wanting to just brush it off. Like me, maybe. Archive the memory somewhere, never mention it again, because it does not fit the picture. I know, obviously, that the city I fell in love with is a fantasy. It doesn't take much to realise that. You just have to still be here in September after the circus rolls out of town. Yeah, the scales fall from your eyes pretty quick. When you walk around this rich city, this city of lawyers and bankers, economists and life insurers, carefully calculating what and who must be sacrificed for the greater financial good. Its little pockets of Tories. Genteel, polite, proper, uptight. The Royal Mile at 1 a.m. on a Saturday night is a graveyard. Good for the kind of gothic yarn everyone says they love Edinburgh for, but not so much fun if you're actually there. While in Glasgow, hordes of drunken people gather around the late-night buskers on Buchanan Street and bellow, sing and dance. In Edinburgh, busking is banned after 9 p.m. You're welcome to play bagpipes for the tourists during the day, of course, with the right licence. But Edinburgh tells the world a different story every August. The mirage is so impressive. This incredible, mad, heaving, cosmopolitan, anything goes, all night long, full tilt, all-embracing party town. This beacon of culture and art and understanding lighting up the austere old Scottish stone. I chatted to a very nice, middle-aged, wealthy donor couple a few fringes back about a totally fantastic and quite batshit crazy show we'd all seen. They had hated it. "We've just got too much Bruntsfield in us," they told me, smiling. I stared at them. I had never realised that Bruntsfield is a byword for that very reserved, buttoned-up Edinburgh taste. But of course it is. Bruntsfield is the fancy neighbourhood that borders Toll Cross. Cute cafes, little boulangeries, bookshops, salons. It wears its wealth lightly. It's not Mayfair. But God, it has money. The fantasy I fell for was that it'd be possible to live somewhere like Bruntsfield or Marchmont in a high-ceilinged, mansion-sized tenement flat with gorgeous original features, and swan onto the meadows for a latte every morning, start every day with a direct shot of Arthur's Seat into my eyes, sunset walks up Calton Hill for deep philosophical conversations and profound cultural exchange, basically to live like we lived during the Fringe. I thought that the beauty that this city lays out on a platter for everyone would be mine once I lived here. It never occurred to me that beauty costs. Beauty is a luxury commodity. No one who works in theatre can own property in Bruntsfield or Marchmont. The people who actually get to live in this Edinburgh I dreamed of are the obscenely rich, or at the very least the baby boomers, so long rooted here. The city centre is a theme park, a tourist-friendly, Scotland-themed simulation. But that's what we all say here, as we make for our homes in Gorgie, Restalrig, Bolerno, Leith. Edinburgh is a city with the mentality of a village, so we all bond over the same gripes. The privatisation of public spaces, the streets that you have to pay 30 quid to enter on Hogmanay, the massive private parks in the new town, accessible only to those who live in the huge townhouses alongside them. And of course the trams, the cost of parking, the mice infestations. That is one of the things I love. We can moan equally about it all, us normals. Can't we? Am I allowed to moan? I live here, don't I? Do I qualify to call this place home? I'm not native, but I feel like I've gone native. But I don't sound native, so to say that is just an insult to the born and bred, isn't it? I moved here when I was 7 months pregnant, out of some urgent need to give this city to my daughter, the greatest gift I could imagine for her, to have her be able to call herself a native. But I hear myself talking native and unnative, who deserves to make home here and who doesn't, and I am just betraying this place, my city, my despite everything beloved city, aren't I? For all its stiff upper lip, Edinburgh is still an international, multicultural, enlightened university city. The people in my antenatal groups were Greek, Indian, Tanzanian, Italian, Canadian, Lithuanian, Irish, Welsh, Romanian, Portuguese, and a couple of Scots. Who the fuck here cares where you're from when you've decided to make this home? But it depends where you are. Edinburgh voted 61% no in the Indie Ref, and you would think that would make me more comfortable. Here is a city that is patently not hostile to the English. But of course that is not what it meant, and that's not what it was about. I find myself bemoaning the fact that you can be in Bruntsfield or Stockbridge on a Sunday and not hear a single Scottish accent, as if I don't count as part of the problem, trying to be on the side of the people, the born and bred, who I think might care about these things, as if they fear being invaded. How patronising is that? But then if they did bristle at us, wouldn't they have a right to? Us legions of English descending on the Stockbridge Farmers Market for a latte and some vegan paella. But come on, it's not like anyone is painting slogans on my door or telling me to go home. If I'm too posh for here, I was never anywhere near posh enough for London theatreland. That is what I always want to explain. 25 years old, at the theatre I moved to London to work for, discovering that my colleagues had never been to Poundland. Not that I was in there every day, but where else do you go for batteries or sellotape or Tupperware? Later at the office I worked at in central London, being sniggered at for drinking instant coffee, surrounded by sushi joints and Pretz, and no one could fathom me saying that I missed Greggs, missed Eccles cakes, Bakewell tarts, all the classic stodge of Derbyshire. But I went to uni, and so did my parents, all my siblings. If you wanted, I could quote Milton at you. But our household income was low enough that the council paid my university fees back in the day. That's the trouble with a hybrid identity. You never feel like you're on the right side of anything. I lived in so many places growing up that I'm not really from anywhere. Childhood split between London and Australia, and then Derby, then Sheffield through my early 20s, then back to London. I'm a northerner, midlander, southerner hybrid. So what does it matter where I am if I don't belong anywhere? Home is the place I choose to give that title to. It's that simple. Sure. Until you live somewhere where your accent is forever associated with the pretentious, out-of-touch southerners ruling from afar. But like I say, maybe I'm thinking far more about it than anyone else. Ultimately, I hope I'm not the worst kind of invasion. What we all really have to fear is their money invasion, the foreign investment that is making Edinburgh go the way of London, old high streets demolished for luxury student flats, swathes of the most desirable accommodation bought up to sit empty or be permanent Airbnbs. Yeah, beauty costs. And I bought into it. I am one of the ones feeding the idea of Edinburgh. What I've actually bought, now I managed to buy, is a flat out of town opposite a retail park, with a fine view of Aldi and Home Bargains, and yeah, Poundland. But I'm still duped. Because compared to London, Edinburgh is the size of a village, so even though the meadows aren't on my doorstep, they're not far, I can stand on them anytime. I can walk out from my home and in no time be on top of a hill at Craiglocker or Corstorphine and look out over my city. Our little humpback mountain in the centre, the port and the cranes around Leith, the high rises of Wester Hales, the Forth Bridge through the golden sun-touched rainy mist in the distance. Yeah, there's just no arguing with beauty. It trumps everything. I guess all my life, never being interested in chasing God, or money, or popularity, or belonging, see above, or fame. All I have ever really chased is beauty. The police never followed up with me after the attack. The victim and I found ourselves differing on basic details of the attacker's appearance, his hair colour, what he was wearing. It's kind of incredible how what makes it from eyes to brain can vary so much between people. I know I can't give my daughter a version of Edinburgh that is poverty-free or crime-free. I can't fake her hometown for her. She has to know and love the real Edinburgh, whatever the hell that means. While staying safe, of course. She could go on a train-spotting walking tour. That'd give her the gist. Is it weird to want her to have a nationality different from me? But it's not a different nationality as such. Well, but it is. I want her to know the Scots words and not have to ask for translations. The words I encounter most often all mean something negative. Knackered, dirty, stupid, bad-tempered, ugly, confused, miserable, ruined, wet. But I can't joke about that, can I? Fondly or not. She'll be allowed to. I'm not. I hate the fringe, but she's a pure native, so maybe she'll full-on hate it. She will never have known the Fantasy Festival Edinburgh and what it's like to experience it. She'll only know the great annual wanker invasion, and that I started out as one of them. I hope she forgives me. I don't know if she'll ever be starry-eyed over the place like I still am. Maybe you just can't when it's your hometown. Maybe I am ridiculous. But I kind of pity her that. But it'll mean she belongs, which probably means more. Doesn't it? It depends how you look at it.
How big the house was. How very old. And me so very small. 1666 the house was built, my father said. My mother never spoke of it at all, which was strange because it was her family built the house and owned the village that grew up next door and the farmland all around, until they lost it all. My brothers were much bigger than me and they were sent away to school, so there was me mum, and there was me dad, and there was me, rattling around this great big ramshackle house with its empty servants' quarters and its derelict nursery wing, its monkey puzzle on the lawn outside, and the great big cedar tree and the wind that howled around the house at night. I liked to be with me mum when she was with her women's friends in the tiny room where she did her sewing. I was happy there. I played with, I forget what I played with. But I know that once I stole a doll from a girl at school. I locked myself in the downstairs lavatory. My dad hammered on the door and he said, "Come out at once!" School was learning my 10 times table. 7 and 8 were really hard. School was writing in pencil, but not being allowed to rub anything out. School was copying copper plate letters, which looked so beautiful on the page, but after I'd copied them, looked like such a mess. Once they were going to have a play, and we had to choose whether we wanted to be gnomes or flowers. Well, I wanted to be a flower. I mean, who would want to be a gnome? And I couldn't understand why I was the only boy. We rehearsed in the yard, outside the girls' lavatories, a place where boys were not allowed to go. I liked it there. Home was meat and 2 veg. Home was please and thank you. Home was eating with a knife and fork. There was a very complicated way of eating peas, which was important to get right because we were gentlemen. In my family, we never touched or hugged. And the word love was one we never used at all. I don't know why. Perhaps it wasn't manly. Perhaps it wasn't British. And the atlas in the library, so many countries were coloured a funny sort of red because they were part of the British Empire. My dad said it was the best empire in the whole wide world. When they sent me away to the place with grey blankets and the iron beds in rows, they taught me Latin and ancient Greek, but they never taught me science, because I was supposed to be a gentleman and rule the empire. I remembered my mum with her women friends in the tiny sewing room, and the deep red hearth rug and the warm coal fire. It seemed to me like a kind of paradise. But by then, the atlas was gone, and the house had been sold. And my mum had died of bleeding in the brain. And there wasn't a home anymore. It had gone. As I grew older and I fell in love, I began to understand that I had been trained to govern an empire that wasn't there anymore. So I began again, the way you do. I became a bus conductor and then a student nurse. We lived in a commune, my lover and I, because we knew the personal was political. And we knew we were going to change the world. And then we had a child, and the commune fell apart. Everyone else left, and it was gone. So we began again, the way you do. We made a home where it didn't matter how you ate your peas, and where we touched and hugged each other all the time and said, I love you, every single day. Until cancer ate up my lover's brain. My daughters grew up and left home. And it was gone. Then I stopped living as a man, and I began again, the way you do. I live now by the old harbour where the ships used to come. With jute, with timber, fine claret wine and slaves. The other side of the water is a war memorial for all the merchant seamen lost at sea. Because it all has gone. The ships have gone. The harbour clogged and useless with mud and silt. And its entrance blocked by the road to the shopping centre. But I was happy there until the virus came. And now I live in exile, within sight and sound of the sea. The sea whose waters will one day rise and overwhelm my little house. And now I know there is no home. There is no place of safety or of refuge. Perhaps there never was. Perhaps there never will be such a thing again. That it too will all be gone. My granddaughter comes to the garden sometimes and runs around and gives me presents of stones. I pray for her survival. And as for us, the grown-ups, those who now are forbidden to touch, we must go forward into the unknown world alone.
Where I am from is on the edge of a forest, and that isn't a metaphor. We really were raised on the edge of a forest. I grew up outside a village north of most but not nearly all the big cities you could name. It has its own folk stories and fairies. There's a couple of castles, cafes, and islands accessible only by rowboat. It's easy to go misty-eyed, but rural is not the same as remote. There still were plenty of folk. Teenagers still smoked too young, adults still argued, and the rough bits of humanity don't leave just because there is more green. In fact, there were plenty of rumours of drug running through those rural roads. It's easier to hide when the police are only operating one day a week. Which is to say, it is a populated place, but we were just scattered like stars. And you could see the stars. There were no street lamps down that little road where I grew up. You had to learn the potholes if you were to walk in the dark. And I didn't realise I remembered them until I wrote this. I still remember the potholes and how the council refused to fix them. They were caused by logging lorries, chopping, taking, and making money. Forestry, fruit picking, and farming. That's where I'm from. And lots of people are surprised because it seems so city. But I'm always less squeamish than people expect. When you grow up as a child around the wild, you know the only really scary thing about a forest is getting lost in it. And still our parents trusted us to go out into the wilderness. I suppose in some ways it was dangerous. There were plenty of mistakes and missteps, broken bones, biking, hiking and logging accidents. Blood and mud in amongst the green and serene. Where I'm from is seasonal, which is to say on most days you can tell where we are in the year by clocking the leaves, bees and trees. The hills, forest and water wear the weather like a cloak. It feels this duty acutely. In the summer, every shade of green can be seen. The water in the loch is crystal clear, and we might jump into that H2O not caring what was below, but we'd soon screech with horror and delight when our foot brushed the underwater plant life. A bus or car might pass, but they were so few you would stop to see if it was someone you knew. And sometimes knowing everyone felt suffocating. And sometimes it felt safe. I suppose it's impossible to get one without the other. In autumn is when the leaves would crunch and turn the colours of fire. I remember seeing deer grazing and never failed to find it amazing, both of us animals, growing, knowing to leave each other alone, them fleeing fleet of foot back into the forest. But those same deer could cause accidents, and more than one person had a car that was a write-off from smashing into a stag. It could be dark and dangerous on those roads if you didn't know what you were doing, and plenty of us didn't know what we were doing. In winter, we would get snowed in, or if there was a flood, the river would break its banks and entrap us. I grew to know the frustrating work of floodplains before I even really knew what they were. But the older I got, the less it snowed, climate change having her way. The winter could feel long and damp and dark, but spring was always there to make its mark in the shape of snowdrops and daffodils. Spring was my favourite time, holding my birthday month and lambs as sweet as lollipops. I loved watching the land come to life. It brought hope and heat. Though during foot and mouth disease, I remember the piles of burning cattle, unsettling us from the school bus. I still remember the smell of burning hair, extraordinary and amongst the ordinary. Nature can be brutal, but it's amazing what you can get used to. Blood and mud in amongst the green and serene. Where I am from is seasonal, which is to say it survives on tourist trade. Many villages are built this way. The artificial ebb and flow as people come and go. Though the hardy bikers and hikers would be a steady slipstream of strangers. Many of us worked in B&Bs as cleaners, and as a teenager the beauty of the place was lost on me. The romance of lochs and rocks don't mean much when you're 16 and don't live near a bus stop. It became a place to escape, but either by listening to music or moving away. I knew I would never stay. Those seasons couldn't keep me. Where I am from is not where I am. Where I am has more buildings and businesses and buses. Its accent has harder corners. There is more choice and convenience, but there is less stillness and space, and those are still things that I miss. My parents don't live there anymore, where I'm from. And although I know a few friendly faces, I don't really have a reason to return. The internet tells me it looks exactly the same as it did when I left when I was 18. But a Photoshop picture isn't a patch of seeing the loch at sunset. All stillness and splendour. It's easy to go misty-eyed at the memories of a place, but it could be hard and you had to be hardy. It could be lonely and you could feel the lack, especially as a teenager dreaming of all the things the city holds and shows. Like everywhere else in the world, the good bumps up against the bad, beauty next to ugly, poverty next to money. It was a place of extremes in some respects, second homes next to council flats. And sometimes those differences felt exaggerated by all that space. But still, I feel lucky to have grown up on the edge of a forest. That loch, those leaves are still in me. I feel proud to have started somewhere rural and get angry when people assume life starts and stops at the city. I should have said that to 16-year-old me. But I suppose what you need changes as you age, and the truth of somewhere can begin to fade. Where I am from is a memory that sits in me, and it's filtered through the lens of life lessons. But I really am always less squeamish than people expect.